Hi, folks, and welcome back to the auraborrows podcast. We are on episode 4. Oh my gosh, it's been like a month now. That's crazy. Keeping it up for that, keeping up that consistency is what I'm trying to say. Um, so today we are going to be discussing the Judgment card in the tarot, and this was a request by my mom. So, we'll be discussing, as usual, the art of the card. We're going to be looking a lot more at the classical meaning of this card for this episode, because I did tie in a lot of more like modern imagery, I suppose, to represent things that correlate with the original meanings. And we're going to kind of unpack the different elements as we go. So for this one, yeah, there's a few different aspects that I want to look at. But I will, of course, put the card on the screen for those watching on YouTube. And of course, I've also dressed in the colors of the card today. Oh my gosh, hold on. Had to show those watching on screens at home the look. So putting the card on the screen, we're gonna go through the different aspects. We've got let's start at the back and move our way forward. So at the background of this piece, there's this blue hazy glow, and there's these glowing diamonds that kind of hang as pendulums in this like midnight darkness. Um, and I really love this piece, this feature, because it blends really well into the background, but there's sort of like this mystical vibrance that brings this sort of ethereal image to the card. So, one thing that I think a lot of people are drawn to is the barbed wire that kind of curls around the side of the card. Um, and that um, it's backed by orange and sort of like this beige, which I think is a really, really great contrast to the blue. So it just adds like hot and cold, like this juxtaposition of color, and it's a really nice balance of the card visually. I find a lot of people are drawn to this card probably because of those colors and like the contrast. It catches the eye. So the core element of this card is the collection of arms and hands reaching. So some are flexed in their reach, some are gentle and relaxed, and others are touching. A couple do manage to reach past sort of the border of the barbed wire that appears, um, and it looks as though the rest are kind of like writhing to get out past this barbed wire. So that's like the general imagery of the card, but I want to bring our attention to the title of the card. Um, the word judgment at the top, all the font is the same except the U, which is etched in red pen. And yeah, I felt like that was very symbolic of the card itself. Draws a bit more attention to you. So yeah, that's the overall look at the card. Um, my camera is currently flashing, saying that it is dying. Ah, of course. Um, so I'm like trying to still pace myself and not rush through this episode. Um, bear with me. I may have to restart my camera a couple times. But to talk about this card, we got to discuss the classical imagery, as I was saying before. And I feel like at this point, you guys are probably going to notice a theme that, like, there's a lot of sort of religious influence. Like I said in episode 1, it is uh it has been a blessing for me to have had um experience in religious settings for my degree, and for unraveling a lot of the information of the cards and stuff, like mysticism, the occult. um there's a lot of ties to religion, Christianity, and if I didn't have the knowledge that I do, I feel like I would be floundering a little bit more to try and figure stuff out. So yeah, it's beneficial from like a um from a knowledge perspective, like applicable knowledge. Um, Even though I don't consider myself like a religious person, it's cool to know things. Anyways, so the Judgment card in the original Rider-Waite Tarot, Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot will include uh, the Judgment cards associated with the more religious idea of the Day of Judgment. Um, and while the tellings of the Day of Judgment and religious text kind of have this like apocalyptic theme, this feeling, there's still strong ties to the resurrection, which is what we commonly see depicted on the Judgment card in the more classical imagery. So, um, as usual, I will have a visual of the card on screen just in case you guys wanted to check that out. Um, but yeah, for anyone who's just listening, the original card has an image of an angel or a heavenly being uh, being called down. I want to say this was Michael, um, the messenger. Maybe it's Gabriel, one of the angels, calling down to people on Earth, and we see these people rising from their coffins and rejoicing at their own resurrection. Um, in the background, there's depictions of mountains, water, just kind of like the elements of the natural world. Um, but the representation of these things are a variety of obstacles on our journey, the highs and lows, the ebbs and flows of life. Wow, poetry. But yeah, it's representative of all these different experiences that we may have that challenge us on our journey towards our personal day of judgment. So, um, this card isn't like its traditional meaning does not have the representation of like God watching you in the same way that Santa does, like he's not watching you when you sleep. Um Giving you the side eye through life as you make your own choices. But it's more of a focus on breaking free from the harshness of judgment and finding this sense of renewal and new beginnings. So, if this sounds a little familiar, even though we haven't covered the Fool card, but you have like a general sense of the Fool, you're on track because this is a similar idea to the Fool card in that there are new beginnings happening. Um, and it sort of also pulls ideas from the Wheel of Fortune card, which we discussed last week. Um, in the case that there's an influence of things being uncontrolled, or like certain elements that may create obstacles in your path. So I bring all this up because there is, in fact, a reason for these cards to be like precise milestones in this journey. So, if we're talking about the numerical signs of the cards, the Fool is 0, the Wheel of Fortune is card 10, and Judgment is card 20. So, um, each one of these cards has a 0 in the numerical ordering. Um, and 0 in numerology is a representation of nothingness, as I'm sure we can all imagine, but it is also the absolute, like the wholeness, because of the visual of a circle. So when it is on its own, we see it as the Fool. And don't worry, we will get into this card, just not in this episode. I have a few episodes planned, so relax. But yeah, we'll come back to that. But the Fool, it's a focus on the fact that we know nothing. It is that nothingness, but at the same time, it is the immense possibility of our journey ahead. The Wheel of Fortune, as we discussed, has the 1 next to the 0, which allows us to recognize our power in the situation and see that we can use that power to take control of how we might turn things in our favor. For Judgment, as we're unraveling today, we have the 2 preceding the 0. So the number 2 is about balance and collaboration. It's a representation of bringing things together as a force as opposed to holding control as your own. Um, and throughout the card's journey, we see that our development, we see how that kind of like influences our development of the understanding of our situation, and sort of that growth from going in blind, trying to control things on our own, to being able to open up. So yeah, like we're going through this sense of renewal, breaking the confines, and becoming unified with life itself. So the idea of judgment is something that is inflicted upon us, but it can also be something that we wield ourselves. So it does go both ways. And this also dips into intuition, as our immediate judgments may come from a place of intuition, while other judgments might be constructed through what we have been socialized to believe is good and bad, which we sort of touched on with the devil card. So, again, if you're starting to see like a lot of connections and seeming uh, overlap between the cards, you're subconsciously piecing the story of the tarot or the fool's journey together. So, good job. You're on track. So, let's jump back to our card, and its elements that relate to this meaning. So obviously the background of the card has to represent life in some way. And even though like in this card, it's a subtle feature, the diamond in the background is immensely important, and it's a symbol in a variety of cultures. So the crystal diamond that we see in the natural world represents clarity because it's clear. Um, but it can also represent reaching an ascended state of wisdom. So, sort of that same old idea of like the 0 to the 1 to the 2, gaining wisdom, ascending. Um, So this can out bleh. This connects to that growing understanding of life, um, with numerology as sort of like the the main factor that we can latch on to see this growth. So by the card 20, we've evolved to understand how things work and our direction in life. Um, in alchemy, the sort of the alchemist understanding the diamond's ability to reflect light also represents sort of this spiritual journey, which directly binds itself to the meaning of this card. Obviously, this card, if you can see the visual or you have an image of it in your mind, um, the diamonds on this card aren't that of like an engagement ring. They're not the kind that like refracts light. Oh my gosh, I can't speak today. Tripping over my words. But anyways, the imagery in our personal card is more likened to like video game graphics. Um perhaps namely The Sims. And I will say, no sim was stuck in a pool without a ladder in the making of this card. Uh, but you know, the image of the crystal above a sim's head has something. It was something that came to mind when I was assembling this card. The moment I saw that that graphic, I was like, oh yeah, it makes me think of the life. Um, You know, as it doesn't carry a lot of meaning in the card itself. Like I it's more a nod to the game of life that you create through The Sims. Um, but yeah, I felt like that was more modern and I kind of liked that idea better than having a diamond in the background. Um, because yeah, they're I don't know. Diamonds have become like generally generic. Gasp. But you know, I just wanted to mix it up a little. Thought that was a funny little nod to the gamers. Am I right? Anyways, so the barbed wire is uh always something people seem to notice about this card, as I mentioned. And it's one of the elements that's so packed with meaning, and I'm obsessed with it. Uh, so, firstly, there's the religious kind of association, always comes back. Um, so the barbed wire, especially in this curved shape, it can be a symbol of the crown of thorns worn by Christ during crucifixion, and that is like his judgment kind of thing, inflicted by the people of the world. It was the sort of the consequence of the judgment that they made. But also, you know, it brings on like his day of judgment. Um, but yeah, I wanted to focus more on some varied symbolism. So, as someone who also tattoos, the barbed wire is a symbol that I see a lot of people uh, with, and it pops up in my suggested feed when I'm looking for like inspiration for different flash styles and stuff. And of course, it can mean different things to different people, but it commonly represents the overcoming of hard things, potentially even traumatic experiences or loss. And I think of its presence uh, on the judgment card to be quite fitting for this reason. There's loss in the struggles of life, especially when we fight against things that really push and hurt us. And while resilience is like revered and stuff, it's freaking exhausting. So to stand firmly as yourself, whatever version you are beyond your experience, that's kind of what the judgment card is meant to represent, is standing above it all. So the barbed wire can also represent being held back, captive, or trapped some way. And we briefly touched on this in the imagery of the original card as people like broke out of the coffins that once contained them. And it's sort of that idea of like renewal. So the only piece that really interacts with the barbed wire in uh in our card is the collection of hands and arms that are reaching out from the card itself. Hi, hi again, folks. As you may have guessed, my camera died. Um, I called it, so we're picking up where we left off. And to further that, I went through this whole thing, forgot to hit record on my mic. So, going for another round. But, yeah, to pick up where we left off, discussing barbed wire, the hands that are sort of contained within it. So, as I kind of mentioned, the hands are the only thing that really interacts with the barbed wire, and they're reaching out in this cluster. While there's no facial expressions really to understand the feelings wrapped up in this card, there is some kind of expression through the physical nature of the hands themselves. So whether that's a closed fist, this could represent anger, frustration, strength, even grit. There's a slightly open hand. This could be, an encouragement of bringing something forward, like a slight openness, a reaching of the hand, but more of not in the way of reaching out for something, but reaching out to have something reach back. Um, yeah. We also have some hands that are flexed, some soft, some caressing. Like I said, open, closed, and all of these do kind of elicit some kind of experience, some kind of emotional expression that we can understand through how our hands may have communicated those same expressions. Um, and in the card itself, we have two hands that kind of break through the barrier, one under, one over. And I want to leave that kind of open in terms of interpretation, but I have this collection of hands that are interacting with each other, um some, like I said, even caressing each other sort of in a protective covering nature. um at different points we can look at that representation in the card and find ourselves at different points in our life. It brings up different questions or different aspects of where we're at in relation to those around us. So this whole ensemble of hands is a representation of unity. So the hands are kind of working together to break past that which appears to contain them, the barbed wire. So the question in this case may become, in sort of a reflection, what does the barbed wire represent in your own life? What's in place that holds you where you are, and you know what do you feel the need to break free from? And then, as I said before, examining the hands in and sort of their placement, their physical features, and what that might represent in terms of expression and emotion, and really surveying like where you're at in that personal journey. um so a lot of complexities, and one thing that I really, really love about this card, and I've touched on it a few times now, but I can't get over how expressive this is without any kind of facial thing. Like, body language seems like such a huge aspect of this, and I kind of love that because it's almost like this idea of, like, you don't need to say something. Sometimes, it's more about action. It's more about joining forces, collaboration, standing with someone against something greater. And, like, this doesn't even necessarily have to be a representation of, like, various people in your life. This could be various iterations of yourself, different versions of yourself, um, because you've kind of like ascended through different different yous, so there's a bunch of past selves that you can rely on in order to grow. And there is a sort of the ties to the judgment of past self and stuff, and to examine that is to unravel your own judgments of self at different periods. So it's in one way sort of this representation of, like, I say representation a lot. I'm so sorry for that. But, we're talking about cards and symbolism and all that. So you're bound to hear it. Um but yeah, the one way of reading this card is to consider the ways in which you have judged yourself, potentially harshly for the things that you didn't know at the time. But in sort of your new state, this new awakening, this rebirth sort of experience, um, you're able to look back and go, you know what, I was doing what I needed to do. I was where I needed to be, and, like, without that experience, I wouldn't be where I am today. And that is, that's a good judgment, because judgment isn't just about, like, bad judgments, negative judgments of others. Could be a judgment of self. Um, on the flip side, we did touch on at the beginning the you, um, the you in the title that is etched in red pen as opposed to the more text font black style of the other lettering. And this draws attention. This makes it stand out. And this is a simple reminder that sometimes when you stand out among the rest, there will be more eyes on you. There may be more judgment. But is this fear of an external judgment the thing preventing you from moving forward? Is it the thing that is preventing you from living the life that you want? So these are considerations that come up when we're reading the card, and a lot of it really comes down to that opportunity for a new beginning. That's something that is entirely dictated by you and your ties to everything, everyone. Um, because you are one working facet in the universe. You are part of the whole. So the whole being zero. Ta-da. Wow. Full circle. Oh my gosh. Another full circle. um but yeah, so in reading the judgment card, again, every card reading, you're going to have a variety of different meanings that can be derived from a singular card depending on the cards that it is paired with. So there will be other themes and stuff that come up that might indicate one way or another where this sense of judgment is coming from. But yeah, if there is a certain aspect of the card that really jumps out at you, I invite you to look inward, figure out what that specific aspect of the card might represent to you, and allow yourself to be, you know, taken with that, investigate. Um but yeah, that is what I have for you today, for discussing the judgment card. Thanks for coming along on this wild journey. Um, I have a few exciting plans for February this month. We're going to be looking at cards that I think relate specifically to the month of February. So I think they'll be very topical, in discussion. So I'm looking forward to those. Definitely tune in next week. We'll be releasing our next episode on Sunday. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.